In this video, I'm going to demo painting a still life from scratch. And please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that bell icon so that you do not miss any of my future updates. Hey everyone, my name is Shuchi and I specialize in painting still life and portraits using oil paint. So let's get started. Here's what my setup looks like. I have a tomato in a cup and I have set it under a lamplight. I want to show you real quick. So here's what my setup looks like. And I have a controller in my hand where I could control the temperature of the light. So let me show you how it looks like. So this is the switcher that I have in my hand and I control the temperature of my setup with this. So here's what it looks under warm light. Yes, and then natural light and then cool light. So yeah, this is basically how I choose the temperature of my light, and I just pick one that I want to paint my setup under, and today I'm going to paint it under cool light. And that's all. That's how I have set up my still life, and now I'm ready to paint. I'm gonna paint on this canvas which I have taped on a board from all the sides, and it's a 6x8 size canvas, and yeah, it is an oil primed surface. So let's begin. So I start with a color wash to get rid of the white part of the canvas so that it's not intimidating. So here I have mixed some transparent oxide brown with some ultramarine blue, and I use some Gamsol and just lightly brush over the whole canvas. And I'm gonna leave some parts of it a bit darker than the rest of it. And this is just me looking at the setup and seeing which area is in shadow and which area is in light, and then deciding my background based on it. Next I take my paper towel and just wipe out some excess paint that's on the canvas. And if you wipe out more than you wanted to, just put another layer. So basically at this stage I'm just exploring the background and the shapes that I see. And now let's start drawing. For drawing you'll need a brush which has like a pointed end, and the other thing you need is a paper towel which you can fold this way. Basically you're going to make a cone shaped structure, and you're going to dip it in Gamsol just so that it acts as an eraser. So fold it tightly, and then we can just tip it from here to here. Yep, like this. And now just dip it in Gamsol and you can use it as an eraser. So just showing you again the two things that we need: eraser and a brush. So I start by drawing in the eclipse shape of the cup, and I put markers for the left and right corners of the cup, and I'm still looking at it's where the handle should be. And then let's mark the bottom part of the eclipse and then the top, and I also put this line in the center and in the middle just so that my eclipse is shaped correctly. Eclipse is in the oval part of the cup, and that's how I start. I'm going to look at the angles of the cup on both the sides, and currently I'm just gonna put marks for where I see it, and I'm measuring this whole time. So even though I put this marker, I currently see that it's a bit taller than what I made it. So let's see, at the top to the center, let's see, this is where the tomato starts and this is where it ends. So actually let's measure it with your brush. So I take out my brush and measure the top part of the cup, and then compare that to the rest of the height. So that's what I do on my drawing as well. So here's what the top of the oval looks like, and then here's where I believe the end goes. So yeah, and then use your eraser and just take off this part. So I always use lines for drawing any kind of structures, because I felt that as a beginner it gave me the confidence to draw correctly. So as you see, like right now I'm drawing in an oval, but I'm mostly drawing it using straight lines. So that helps me in like not worrying about the curve of the structure, or if I'm seeing the foreshortening correctly. So I'm just thinking in terms of straight lines throughout this drawing, and take as much time as you need because this stage is very important. You can make any corrections as you go. Like here, what I'm trying to do is just take out paint from the area which is in light, so that it does not mix with the light area or the light paint that I'm gonna put out there. And yeah, so this tool is pretty useful. Like you can actually draw with it. So I use it pretty frequently. Just use some rags, dip it in Gamsol, and just use it as your modeling tool. Let's continue drawing the rest of the cup. And now I'm looking at the angles on the sides. Even though it looks curved, but actually I'm just trying to draw straight lines. So just straight lines for everything. And here I put both sides of the cup, and still measuring all the angles, still looking at my setup all the time, like back and forth between my drawing and my setup. And now I'll just continue to make different changes, and if I see some issues with my drawing, I'll erase some portions of it and then draw it again. And this way of drawing with just lines is basically I'm drawing line drawing. There's another way called mass drawing, where you paint in shapes and shapes of values or shapes of colors. So as a beginner, this is how I drew my setup. I always drew using lines, and now I do draw using masses of values, but this is the technique that helped me initially, just looking at my setup and just creating just these lines. I start drawing in the tomato, starting with line drawing, and I'm not drawing in any circles, but just everything in straight lines. Also for the stem, I'll just draw a line for now and not the width of the stem. I'm going to erase some portions of the cup, just to make sure that the light area remains light. And as usual, I'm going to use my eraser tool, just take out some part. And here I'm just continuing to draw the cup, just looking at the different angles. Like right now I'm drawing in the handle and just looking at the different sides, comparing it to the existing drawing. And yeah, that's what I do. I compare, look at my setup, then look at my drawing, and just continue drawing. So now I feel confident about the structure of my cup, and I'm gonna start drawing in the shadows. So I'm going to start with the cast shadow, the shadow that the cup is casting on the surface. So here are the outlines. Again, I'm drawing everything using line drawing, and I might feel like you'll see it here. I'm going to fill up some parts of it just for a visual indicator that value wise this would be darker, and just to show that yeah, this is going to be shadow. So I'm continuing my drawing, and I'm going to again use straight lines to draw the shadow area as well. I'm going to fill in some area with this paint, just again like a visual indicator. And if I find some portion incorrect or I want to edit it, I again use my tool, the same tissue which has been dipped in Gamsol. Again, throughout my drawing, I'm continuing to look at my setup and my drawing again and again, just to compare those structures, just to see where things should be. And I'm just drawing things out. And if at any point I feel that I need to edit something, I'm using my eraser tool. At this stage, I spend almost like half an hour or 45 minutes just to get my drawing correct. And this is very important as a beginner to get this stage right. Next, I start by painting in the most saturated color that I see in my setup. I put my brushwork slowly on the canvas, and what I do is I basically put a shape and I compare it to the shape that I already have on the canvas. And there are two things that I compare at this point. I compare its value as well as its temperature to the shape that I put before it. So here I am, as you see, putting in these different shapes that I see in my setup, and I'm mixing in those colors on my palette and then adding them there. So all the mixing and like creating of those colors happen on my palette, and the actual application is on the canvas. I also add in some dark shapes, as you see here. There's the centerpiece of the tomato, which is quite distinct, so I'm making sure I put that early. I'm also adding a shape for my reflected light, but I'm gonna make some more changes to it later. Next, I'm gonna work on the area around the tomato, and starting with this shadow area. This particular area, as you see in my setup, it's very close in value, so that's why I thought I should focus on it first. So I'm gonna add a few color shapes in here, a bit dark, and then erase some part of it as well, and that's what I'm gonna start with. Next, I'm gonna work in this area, this one, which is darker than the top, which is the tomato. And so let's see which is the right color. So this, no, actually needs to be darker. Yeah, that's much better. So now I'm gonna add these shapes, and again I'm gonna have an overall value for this shape, and I'm not gonna think of any temperature differences at this point. So mostly like a dark shape around the tomato, and that's where I see my cup value to be. Okay, so that's my focus for now. To create the color, I look at the overall value of the shape, and I do not just like focus on one area. I look at the overall shape and the overall value of that shape. Next, I'll start adding in some dark areas of this cup's handle and some bottom areas of the cup, yeah, that's the better value. So I'm just going to work on this shape at the bottom. Again, I'm going to take my best estimate for this bottom portion, which is a bit difficult to understand in terms of value. Now I'm going to focus on the cast shadow around this cup, and let's start. Okay, so let's start with the darkest area and the darkest area around the bottom part of the cup. And I'm also looking at the temperature, so I'm going to make a few estimates right now, just comparing to my existing values and just comparing to my existing temperature, the different shapes that I've already added. And I believe it's a bit red compared to what the piece that I have put it on. I think it's white in color. I put it on like a old white canvas. And also adding the shadow for the handle, which is from this part. Yeah, next is the area around the cast shadow, and this is also another gray, but it looks a bit greenish gray or a bit bluish gray compared to the one that's right next to the cup. So that's my estimate, just comparing those two values. So talking about grays, I came across this term called colorful neutrals, which I learned in artist Michelle Tully's workshop on portrait painting, and it was an amazing class, and this was an amazing concept to me, and that was the first time I heard about it. And it was all about creating these different grays in just by changing their hues. I believe I should create a separate demo just to show you how to create those neutrals by changing reds or yellows or blues, because it's such an interesting and important concept to learn. Okay, now getting back to the lights. So I start with the light area of the cup, and this is what I add in. Also the background, just adding the lightest light. And although it looks like I'm using pure white in this video, I'm not. It's actually, I've added a bit of viridian and some ultramarine blue, and just the saturation makes it looks it's like pure titanium white out of the tube, but it's actually not. It's a bit cooler color because my light is cool, and so here I'm focusing on just one block of color, not much temperature changes at this point, or not much value changes at this point, but just adding that one big shape. Fixing a few other things like the area at the bottom, yeah, and this one as well. I think it's a bit lighter than what I made it. Let's see. Yes, okay. Now fixing the light area again. So making color changes, just making sure I have that shape correct. And this is still a work in progress, so this is not going to be the final value. I'm just adding the lights as I see them, and it's gonna be, I think, in some areas a bit darker or of different temperatures than what I'm adding right now. But for now, the focus is just adding this big shape of color. And back to the shape, making a few more edits along the way. I'm gonna put this light, but I think it's gonna be a bit darker than what I'm adding right now. So I'm gonna edit this portion later on for sure, because this is turning out to be too light than I initially saw. Okay. Oh, oops. Okay, let's fix that. Yes, I'm fixing that edge because it became too hard edged. Yep, that one as well. And yes, let's go. Okay. Next, let's start painting the handle. And I have this lightest light. And let's set that. So that's the handle. And it might have a different shape, or it might be thinner than what I'm painting. But I'm going to paint a bit broader or a bigger brush stroke than what I see. And I'm going to bring in color from the background and then cut through that particular shape. So basically, if you have something like a thin stem showing up and you are unable to make it that thin with your brush, I would say make like a thicker brush stroke and then use the paint around it, like what I'm using the background color right now. I would just come with that color and just make that shape from the outside. So here I started working on the background now, and I'm just putting that shape compared to the base. Okay, and let's shape that cup correctly. And here, okay, let's see. Yes, so the brush strokes that I'm putting in the background, it's not all the same dark color. I'm making it a bit brown in some areas, a bit light green like this one in some areas, and it's all based on observation because I have that still life in front of me and I'm just comparing what I see as the value of the shape, and that's how it's added. And I'm making this brushwork a bit broader and like more like independent, like they're not going through each other. I'm making them in parallel for some, and for some I'm just going on top of the other ones, and this is so that they do not look the same throughout the background. Like the brushwork doesn't look the same throughout the background. Like if you squint or look at this from a distance, you will see that they all merge together well and they look like, okay, the light is coming from the right side. And that's my whole experiment on this one, like just having these brush strokes next to each other and not like a whole blob of paint right behind that cup, just to see if that looks correct. Now I'm gonna add the darts of the handle, and what I'm gonna do is make my best guess and put that color in the shape that I see, and it might be incorrect in some areas, but will make my best guess. I'm gonna work on that shadow part again because I think it's not as light as I've painted it the first time, and so I'm gonna take a big brush and gonna put that color in, and I can add the lights later on, but that's what I see right now. Okay, back to the cup again, and I think this edge doesn't have the right shape. Next, I'm going to work on these value variations in the light part of the cup, also making sure my edges are correct. So fixing that as I go, like this one right here. Now I'm going to continue working on this light area of the cup and making those small value changes and then small temperature changes as well. And here I'm also making sure my edges are not incorrect. So where it should be a soft edge, I'm making sure I soften that part or add that transition color. And if it's a hard edge, then I keep it that way. Talking about edges, it's all about the contrast that you see. So you don't have to make them up. It's basically wherever there is a big contrast between two shapes, like you see that the cup has a bright area and then it's very bright compared to the background, then that edge is going to be hard. Where you see things like see the base of the cup with the cast shadow, so that area is going to have a soft edge because the contrast is very low. So that's how you define the edges. So you don't have to make them up, but you have to see the colors that are next to each other. And hope that helps, because edge work is so important to get right. Otherwise the painting looks like a cutout. And I'm gonna fix a few more things before I move on to painting the tomato. Few small touches. And continuing with the tomato, I'm going to add a few more color notes in areas where I feel it needs to be a bit lighter than what I have. And whenever you add a new shape of color, always compare it to what you already have painted on your canvas. So in terms of the value, in terms of the color, in terms of the temperature, always make comparison with what's existing on your canvas. For this comparison, you need to start by understanding what's the color of your light. In my case, I have used a cool light, and so the colors in the light area are going to be cooler in temperature as compared to the colors in the shadow. So the colors are always relative, okay? They do not independently exist, but they are cooler or warmer in comparison to each other. Whenever we hear people saying that a color is cooler or warmer in light or in shadow, it doesn't mean that we are completely removing a red or yellow when the color is supposed to be cooler, or we're completely getting rid of blues when the color needs to be warmer. But we need to have some version of the color which can be a mix of reds, yellows and blues, but it needs to have one color more dominant than the other, so that when we look at it, or when we have these two colors side by side, we could clearly say that, okay, we could clearly look at them and say, yes, maybe this color is more warmer in comparison to the color which is next to it. So that's what I want you to understand, like the colors are cooler or warmer relative to each other. Next, I'm going to paint in the highlights. And for that, I won't take a blob of paint and just put it directly on that area which is receiving the highlight. Instead, what I'll do is I need some kind of a base coat, and then the highlight would live on top of it. So highlights are never hard edge on objects that exist in nature. For example, your fruits, your vegetables, your leaves, your trees, none of them will have highlights that would be like very sharp edge or like have hard edges to them when you paint. So you will see that whenever some things like these natural objects, whenever they are placed in light, you'll see some kind of a dispersion around that highlight. So that's what we have to paint before we paint in the highlight. Another point when painting highlights is do not paint them at the edge. They're never right at the edge. They might be just before the edge, in which case the form is about to turn into the shadow. So this is one of the mistakes as a beginner. I used to do that as well, that I used to paint the highlight or the lightest light just at the last point of a cup or at the edge of the fruit. That's never the case, because if you understand that form correctly, it's actually turning away in the light and away from the light, and that's the reason why you see highlight right close to the border, but it should never be at the border of the subject. Another thing about highlights is that it changes based on your viewpoint. So if you moved your chair to a different location and you're painting that same subject again, then you will see highlight in a different spot than where you saw it originally. So basically highlight is from where you would view that subject, okay? So do not paint it as like when you start painting that subject, do not add that initially. It should be, I think it should be like the last thing that you add, or close to the last thing that you add. Also, highlights have some kind of a hue, also called color. So they're not pure white unless the object is like you're painting stainless steel or some kind, in which case it would still be a warmer or a cooler version of that pure white. So never take it out of the tube and directly paint it. So I always mix some kind of a blue or some kind of yellow based on what the color of the light is, and that's what you have to carefully paint. So it should always be of some color and not just white straight out of the tube. So I hope this demo is helping you a bit just to learn how to paint from life. And there was another concept that I wanted to bring up for like the beginner oil painters, and that is understanding your palette. So when I started painting initially, I used to just have a few paints out on my palette, and I used to work with something called a limited palette. So what that helped me was just understand what my colors did and what I could create from them. So if you would like to try that, all you need is a set of 4 colors. The first one being ivory black, the next is titanium white, and then yellow ochre, and then some kind of red. So sometimes I use transparent oxide red, and sometimes I also use some kind of a crimson red. So it basically, you have to pick up these 4 colors, and black, actually ivory black is very much like a blue. And you can actually try that out. Like you can create a small mix of colors, like you can mix black and yellow, and you will see there's so many amazing greens that you can create. So basically you can use this limited palette of colors and then just try out your setup using that limited palette. What it helps with is you won't have so many initial issues or initial struggles that you might have understanding what your palette does. And then once you're comfortable with the colors, just these 4 colors, that is ivory black, titanium white, yellow ochre, and transparent oxide red, once you're comfortable with that, you can add some chromatic colors for the same red, yellow, and blue. So you can add chromatic colors such as, for the red you can add cadmium red, for the blue you can add your usual Persian blue, or you can add ultramarine blue. I like ultramarine the best. Or you can add viridian, and then for the yellows you can add some kind of a cadmium yellow, like cadmium yellow pale or cadmium yellow medium, and they're not same, okay? So they each have their role, they each have their temperature, they each create colors differently. Like some might have a cooler version, some might create a warmer version. So it entirely depends on what you want to add, but as a beginner you can always start with the limited palette. And now lastly, talking about alla prima a bit, whenever you're painting wet on wet and in one seating and from life, there are a few things that you need to remember. Like at the end of the day, if you have not finished your painting and you want to come the next day and make a few more edits, make sure that any kind of hard edges are a bit smoothened out. So what I do is, at the end of the day, sometimes if I'm not able to finish my work, I take a soft big flat brush and just lightly go over some of the hard edges that I see. So even though in oil painting it's easier compared to the other medium, it's easier to make edits later on as well. You can even use some kind of a sandpaper and just sand that area, but it gets much easier if you can just like soften that area which has a hard edge and then come the next day and paint it again. So that's what I mean to say, like whenever you're done at the end of the day, if you're not done with your painting, you need to take care of these specific areas that you want to paint the next day. Also, if you have some paint left and you want to use it the next day, which I don't recommend, like you should always work with a fresh pile of color, but if you still want to reuse some of the paint which you've just like poured out at the last minute, you can always store it. Like you can have a container in which you can put that paint and store it for the next day, or you can use like something like a cellophane wrap and just put it over your palette of paint, and that way it stays fresh the next day. So this is just one of the tips that I want to mention, which have really helped me in the past. And that was it, everybody. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to write it in the comments section below, or if you have any feedback for me, please feel free to add that as well. And until next time, I wish you happy painting. Let's keep inspiring each other. Also, if you like this painting and would like to take it home, I have added a link to the description box below. So please add a comment or just send me a message and then we can talk further. Okay, so till next time, have a great day and thank you so much for watching.